Okay, so welcome to this short webinar, Introduction to Peer Review. We're going to be looking at peer review for humanities, media and communications academic journals. So this is not peer review for more scientific journals. I'm just going to do a quick welcome and introductions and then we'll get going. So my name is Dr. Roy Hannay. I'm an Associate Professor of Media Practice at Southampton Solent University. I'm currently editing a special issue for Storyworld's journal, and this session is intended to support the authors engaged in that process, but it's open to anyone else with an interest in the topic. I'm going to try and limit the talking at you and keep it as collaborative as possible so that you take something away from the experience. So the first question I have for you, and you could just put a note in the chat if you have peer reviewed before. So either put yes, no, not yet in the chat, and let's have a look at what your experience is. So we've got a bit of a great mixed, but a lot of not yet. Okay. So the thing I found with this is nobody teaches you how to do these things. You have to kind of figure it out for yourself, and then people complain about quality peer reviews and so on. So the idea here is just to have a little bit of a discussion about this and kind of point out some basic principles of peer reviewing. We're going to start with why it's important, and the first thing to talk about is perhaps the idea of gatekeeping. I'm not a big fan of gatekeeping, but actually what it does is that it establishes a benchmark of quality and sets academic writing apart from other kinds of writing, and sort of, I guess, sets a benchmark for success and membership of a community. But importantly, it's also about improving scholarship. So getting feedback on your work and then improving it, in theory, raises the standard of what we do. So it's not just a sort of a threshold that you have to cross, but there is, in theory, at least support and development for your work so that you actually improve. And finally, there's a sense of community building. So if we think of it as a collaborative practice, rather than this idea of a policing role, we think of it as a collaborative practice. It's a way that we all support each other, even if we don't know who it is we are reviewing. We all support each other to improve our scholarship and provide the best kind of quality academic writing that we can. So just a question for people. Can you put a quick response in the chat? What is the best or worst review you have received? Yes, for your paper or for anything else you've had peer reviewed? If you haven't had a peer review before, then that's going to be a bit of a struggle. But if you have, so Charlotte says, asking for something specific to the UK to be rewritten, looking at an international version which didn't exist. So that's a classic, isn't it? Asking for something which is kind of almost impossible to deliver. Okay, so let's have a look at what journal editors expect. So originality is something people are looking for. argument and clarity, and contribution to the field. And I'm going to just talk through each of those very, very quickly, and then we're going to actually have a go at a peer review. So originality is often thought of as a new way of looking at familiar material. So it doesn't need to be brand new. It doesn't need to be something that hasn't been explored before, but a new way of looking at something that we already have is enough to be considered original. So, for example, bringing together theory and case studies in unexpected ways, or even just reviewing the literature, that can be a very useful and helpful activity for academic writers. Introducing marginalised, overlooked voices, archives or methods, so revealing things that have yet to be revealed or talked about, that can be considered original as well. So there's many ways that even in today's age, when you might say everything has already been written and said, and everything that's going to be said is going to be said, there's always new ways of saying these things and talking about the things that interest us. When it comes to argument and clarity, we're looking for clear research questions or a problem set out at the start. And it's very often, I find when I'm reviewing, that either the research question is unclear or not set out at the start, or it's not really followed up. And I think that if you do set yourself a real clear sense of a problem at the start of a paper, it should be carried through. And if it isn't, then that's often the first thing that I comment on in a review. So that idea, there's a line of reasoning. Rather than a collection of things, there is a line of reasoning that runs through the paper. And a coherence between theory, method, and evidence. So the literature review should set up the method should bring us to the evidence, which is then discussed. Contribution to the field. So does the article cite and engage with the right scholarship and not just the usual suspects? Our reviewers often like to see recent citations rather than kind of lots of old citations, so that there's an engagement with the latest research and latest ideas. But also, you know, it's fairly easy these days to dig into the literature and find people doing interesting work. So it should be possible to unearth things that we are maybe not familiar with. Does it relate to current debates in media and communications, or carve out new ones? You know, extending debates into new areas or opening up new areas for a current debate is perfectly acceptable. Maybe it's a little more challenging to carve out a completely new one, but people do that. Importantly, will readers of the journal care about it? And that's something that the editor of the journal will be concerned about. It's like, does this paper really sit with the journal? Does this paper resonate with the interests of the readers of the journal? Because they have a certain sense of scope, what their journal is about, and they also have an audience to think about, their audience, the audience for their journal. So bearing that in mind, I'm going to post an abstract into the chat, if I can actually get to it. Let me send it. Okay. Why not? Okay. Well, what I will do then, I will post the text of the abstract in the chat. It won't let me do that either. Okay, well, there is the abstract. So I'd like you to read through that abstract. It's from a paper in a journal of media practice and education. It was part of a special issue which I edited, guest edited for that journal about the hero's journey. And our intention was to expand the debate around the hero's journey. To have a read of that, and then we'll go to the next stage. So is anyone still reading? Can we move on to the activity? Great, okay. So what do you think in terms of originality, argument, and contribution? So we have one offer there so far, but perhaps other people can put their thoughts into the chat. What do you think in terms of originality, argument, and contribution? So David says the abstract seems to be clear as to how its original expanding ideas. The abstract seems to be clear. I think it's unclear as to how a single case study would be sufficient to make the kind of argument being claimed. In terms of originality, it focuses on marginalised voices, of course. Any other comments in chat? Seems clear and original so far. Would like to see how it engages with current literature. Yes, but I think you would probably find that in the article itself. This is obviously this is just an exercise, so we don't have time to read the whole paper. But just to give you a sense of how to use these ideas, originality, argument, and contribution in looking at a document. So I've got a couple of made up reviewer comments. What do you think works in this comment? The abstract identifies a clear gap in the literature by revisiting Campbell's monomyth through the lens of gender identity. The focus on Brienne of Tarth is well chosen, and the argument for non-normative heroism feels timely and original. For improvement, I would suggest sharpening the articulation of how this article moves beyond existing feminist critiques of Campbell to make the contribution to current debates in media and storytelling more explicit. What do you think works about this? Any comments from in the chat, please? What do you think works about this reviewer comment? Anyone got any thoughts they'd like to share in the chat? Yeah, it has a clear action for improvement. And I think that's really, really important if you are reviewing, that you're not just commenting, but that you're making suggestions. Now, I wouldn't go as far as us suggesting how to rewrite or how the author should make changes or what changes they want to make. But suggesting ways to approach improving the work is really, really important. So this idea, someone has commented here, refining points out a direction. It's kind of insightful and it shares that insight with the author. So in contrast, what doesn't work here? The author relies too much on trendy concepts like gender identity and dismisses Campbell unfairly. The case study is not substantial enough to warrant publication, and overall the work feels too subjective to count as serious scholarship. So why is that problematic? Comments in the chat. It's very subjective, isn't it? It's kind of, it's dismissive and vague, and it shuts down dialogue rather than moving towards some kind of insightful improvement. Yeah, it feels very personal. It would be kind of, you know, to use words like dismissive and vague, it's kind of would certainly make the author feel kind of attacked a little bit, wouldn't it? So this is the kind of review that we want to try and avoid. So I think, you know, we want to be positive and empathetic and work towards a collaborative sense of being a critical friend, but being supportful and incisive. So if you were going to put a checklist for writing a constructive review together, what would you include on that checklist? I actually do have a checklist which I will share with everyone, but I obviously it's not allowing me to post in the chat, so I'm going to have to do that by email later. So, but what would you put on a checklist for a peer review? Anyone want to share any ideas in the chat? Yeah, actionable suggestions. Some good suggestions there. Clarity, vital. Double check for own subjectivity. Neutrality, yeah. Have comments got suggested solutions? Readability, story contribution, mainline covering big impacts. The first reviewer added a point of timeliness, which is an extension of originality and applied manner sorts. Yes, great. That's a really good point there. So I will send out to the email list the checklist. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about ethics and peer review, and we can use this idea of COPE, confidentiality, conflicts of interest, bias, and respectful tone. So when we're reviewing, it's important that we are trusted not to use what we read, and that we treat it as confidential information, that we don't actually kind of then take it away and use it ourselves. There's an implied trust in this relationship of peer reviewer. Conflicts of interest. If you know the collaborator, if you know the person or you're at the same institution, perhaps it's not appropriate for you to peer review that piece of work. Judge the work, not the author. Avoid letting identity politics come into things. And be professional. Be a critical friend. Critique the writing, not the person. So if we apply these ideas of confidentially, conflicts of interest, bias, and respectful tone, we should be working to a high ethical standard as peer reviewers. So here's a hypothetical scenario. You are asked to review a paper by someone you've just co-presented with at a conference. What do you do? Answers in chat. Yeah, politely decline. I think that would be the best thing in that situation, wouldn't it, really? That would violate a potential conflict of interest. I think I would argue, David says, depends on how long-standing the partnership was, but I think any partnership kind of brings a conflict of interest, isn't it? Because the point of blind peer review is that you don't know the person, so you can really just focus on the writing. Objective thoughts are welcome, but declaration is needed. So yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it, really? Because you want to help your colleagues and you want to work together, but actually when you take on the role of a peer reviewer, you are also taking on a trusted role as a sort of confident, critical judge. And it may not be appropriate for you to review the work of people that you know personally. That's the little thing about reviewing with empathy. Be critical but constructive. Always suggest improvements. Be considerate. Write as if you were speaking face to face. I like to write, when I'm writing reviews, I like to write in a style or with a voice as though I'm talking to a personal friend. Someone I like, someone I want to help, but someone who's come to me and asked for critical feedback. Meet deadlines. Respect authors and editors' time. It's hell being an editor, I think. Trying to get peer reviews is hard, and it's getting harder and harder for editors to get people to take on peer reviewing roles. And if you are asked or invited and you say yes, then please respect the need to process that peer review in a timely manner. Maintain confidentiality and anonymity. Protect that trust in the process. You know, you are a trusted, confidential reviewer. And avoid bias. If you think there are conflicts, check your assumptions, and please declare them if they are. Few questions just to catch up with the questions. I thought it was common, Tiz, I thought it was common for colleagues to review each other. Yeah, that's, you know, it's certainly not uncommon for people to peer review each other's work, and people you know to peer review your work. But when you are peer reviewing for an academic journal, it's really not encouraged for you to be peer reviewing the work of your students, for example, or for all of other colleagues who you might have a supervisory role over, or who might have a supervisory role over you. It is a challenge in very, very specialized areas where most scholars will know each other. And that's definitely an issue, and a big challenge for editors. But actually editors do need to be mindful of the relationship. It is supposed to be a blind peer review. That's a very, very important baseline for academic peer review. Should we write in the second person or third person? It's entirely up to you. I write in a very first person style, what I think, my views, my opinions. and I will say, this is my opinion. You don't have to listen to me, but this is what I think. My instinct is, or my response is, or when I read it, it feels like this. It's important to remember and to give the author an opportunity to ignore you and to come back and say, this is absolute nonsense. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, ultimately, they are the expert in the topic that they are unpacking in the journal article. Very often you will be reviewing an article and it may be in a field with which you are quite familiar, but they might be unpacking a very specific topic within that field. And the whole point of them being an author and writing an academic paper is that they are sharing a very specific set of expertise and knowledge, which you are hopefully gaining some insight from in reading. And I always find peer reviewing most engaging when I learn something from the author. Can you share experience post-conference or publication? Should meet and say, I got seen, peer reviewed your paper, very good, just a thought. What was the best practice? That's really quite sort of on the edges of an ethical dilemma, isn't it, really? I might ask if the paper was published. If the paper was published, then I might share with them that I was one of the reviewers. It depends a bit on how well I knew those people. Or I might just not mention it at all. I mean, I think the ethical thing to do would be to not mention it at all. It is supposed to be anonymous. So going around saying afterwards, oh, well, I reviewed your paper, is probably crossing a line. So again, in a very specific niche or specific geographic context, well, I think there is even really kind of, it really establishes that need for confidentiality, doesn't it? So even if you are maybe in a very small circle and you are all likely to be peer reviewing each other's papers, it's best not to talk about it. Let's keep the confidentiality and avoid conflicts of interest where we can. So some good ethical problems there. But I think if we go back to that idea of confidentiality, conflicts of interest, bias and respectful tone, then, you know, we can say, let's keep on the right side of the ethical issues and not get into the grey area. Once you get into the grey area, it is called grey for that very reason. Best to stay out of it. But that is my opinion. So from the author's side, how does it feel for you to be sat there getting peer reviews? And I think I always find when I first get a peer review, I'm really kind of quite upset about it, quite affronted. And how dare they? How dare they say this? How dare they don't understand? But actually, what I find is that it's best just to set it aside and come back to it later, and then look in the review, look for the material that will be usable, the material that will help you. And sometimes you need to do a bit of a decoding, searching within there for the thing that they are trying to help you with, and to see it as a kind of positive, critical, helpful suggestion, and just to try and work out why it is that they are reading your paper the way they are, and then go back and see if you can try and improve it. You can write a response. Editors do often invite you to write a response and say how you have responded to the feedback, and it is perfectly legitimate for you to say that you haven't responded to this particular feedback for this particular reason, and the editor will often take that into account. I think if you say that about all of the review and say the review is unhelpful and I'm not responding to it, that's probably not a good place to be. But where you've taken on board pretty much most of the feedback, but there are maybe one or two minor things where you've gone, I don't agree, I'm going to hold my ground, then that's perfectly acceptable. And that's one of the reasons why you're given an opportunity to write a response to the feedback. I think when it comes to revision strategies, people have different ways of working, but I think I like to suggest to people that you start with the more structural stuff, start with the big stuff, and then work through down to the kind of fine detail. What I like to do is I will take the review and I will break that down into a scheme of work, and I will draw out of it all of the elements that I'm going to work on and turn it into a kind of a checklist of actions that I'm going to take, and then I'll work through them one at a time so I've got them all covered, and then I can quickly produce my written response to the feedback from that list. So I can say, I have done these things, I haven't done these things, these are the reasons why I've responded in the way I have. So what kind of threshold would you add to positively or optimistically add a perspective to a paper? So what kind of threshold, being asked, what kind of threshold would you add to positivity, which you perspective can dismiss other good paper? Have you not seen any thoughts? I think I'm trying to be resolutely positive. Sometimes I get papers to review which are clearly written by early career researchers, and they don't really have, can I say, voice, or they often feel like a jumble of facts and information that have kind of been put in there, and it feels like, well, this would require such major revision to work through, that I don't think it's kind of publishable as it is. I will probably say that rather than reject it. I will say to the editor and say to the author that feedback, and this needs major work. And I might say something like, you need to try and avoid this sort of stuffing of papers with facts and information. It's not what academic writing is about. Not for me. I don't really enjoy those kinds of papers. I want to be told a story. Maybe that makes me unique and different, but that's my perspective, and that's the feedback I will give to people. But I will try and be resolutely optimistic and positive about what they have achieved and how they can make what they're doing better, because we learn by doing, we learn through practice and success, and the reviewing process makes us better writers, I hope. Refreshing to hear the role of the voice. Well, I think in humanities, voice is really, really crucial. I mean, I imagine it is still so in more scientific papers, but actually, you know, in the world that I exist in, you know, the thoughts and ideas of a person are what we're working with. That person may be doing all sorts of different research, from literature reviews to qualitative research or quantitative research, but actually it's their thoughts and their ideas which are of real value here. And so that idea of voice is, I think, really important. So just quickly, can you put into the chat one thing you will do differently next time you review or you submit to a journal? Let's have some ideas in the chat. Yeah, think as face to face. Imagine you are talking to them. think that's really helpful, because then that, you know, you're going to address them with kind of respect then, aren't you? Yeah, keep returning to the idea of through line and story, balance between encouragement and constructive criticism. Be balanced and honest. I think that's really a good one, actually. Being honest is hard, though, because it can come across as kind of brutal sometimes. And I think that we need to try and be aware of how brutal our feedback can be. You know, this is that you're critiquing someone's emotional attachment to something they have created. And so we have to sort of take that on board and understand that there is an emotional relationship to the things we create, and that when we get feedback, it can feel quite attacking rather than being a critical, friendly sort of thing. So that's all from me. So someone's just added a note there. I would also add story importance. I know from startup experience, but it really applies to many fields. Yeah, tell a story. I'm a big fan of people who tell a story, because that makes it more engaging and more fun. So thank you for that comment. So if you have questions, we have 5 minutes for questions. Do put them in chat, and we can maybe initiate a bit of a dialogue through the chat space. Okay, so, well, what do you think? What do I think? I think I've told you what I think. This presentation is kind of summarizes where I am and what I think. Be positive, be personal, and be a critical friend. I think that that's what I think. So Charlotte's asking, for Story World, how do you organise the peer reviews? So there's a couple of people in the webinar who are part of the group of authors who are writing for Story Worlds, and what we're doing there is we've just got to the first stage of first drafts, and we as a collective are going to peer review each other's work. So I will assign two of the authors to each of the papers, so that there's a sort of a circle of peer reviewers. And this is partly so we get to practice peer review, partly so we start to build ourselves as a bit of a community, so we all have a stronger sense of what we're all saying in the edited collection. And also an opportunity to improve our writing and improve our papers before they go to submission with the journal. And the journal is Story Worlds. And in this instance, Story Worlds will put the papers through their own peer review process. So I won't be leading the final round of peer review. So the informal author-led peer review is just part of a process that I like to engage in, and I find quite positive when I'm editing special issues. Okay, so what other questions do we have? So I'll be in touch with Charlotte and David and others about the Story Worlds process very shortly. What was the most challenging review received and shared? How did you navigate the process? I don't know. I think actually probably the most challenging review I ever had was when I was doing my PhD viva. Um, and they seemed to take great issue at my sentence construction. And I was then asked to go through and rewrite all of my sentences to make them shorter. And that was probably a reasonable request. I kind of do see this in other people as well. Sometimes we tend to write without punctuation because we're kind of in a flow. And so that took quite a lot of time and felt quite frustrating, but was kind of positive in the end. Um, I don't know. I had this conversation about journals and this idea that journals generate community, and I think that they did once upon a time, but I'm not sure that they do now. I do know I do sit on editorial boards for journals, and I do tend to know the people or some of the people on the editorial boards, but not necessarily through the journal, more through conferences and other networks where I've got to know those people. And then I'm invited to be part of, or there's an application and I apply and then I'm accepted. So I don't necessarily know if I agree that journals still build the kind of community they used to. I think there is a function that they could do, and maybe I'm wrong in this position, but I think that if unless they are organising their own symposia where people are coming together to meet each other in real life, and that is increasingly difficult to do because of the cost of it. I don't think they do build community as much as they could. So maybe that is a big challenge for us as academics to think about how our journals, if that is where we want to build community around our journals, how we do that, how we engage in our readership beyond just the act of publishing and disseminating academic papers. How do we build that community of scholars around our papers? And I'm always open to suggestions on how we do that. Yeah, meeting people in real life, you can't beat it, really. So I'm going to end the recording now, if I can work out how to do that.